Something is seriously wrong with Formula One right now, and honestly, the Japanese Grand Prix just ripped the curtain wide open. We're 3 races into the most technically advanced era in the sport's history, and instead of watching drivers push these machines to their absolute limit, we're watching a 7-time world champion lose 45 kilometers per hour on a straight because a battery decided it was done. We're watching engineers talk their drivers through corners like GPS systems. And we're watching a team secretly remove a component from their car without even telling their driver. So here's what I want you to think about. Is Formula One actually still the pinnacle of motorsport? Or have we accidentally built a championship where the algorithm drives faster than the human? So here's what actually happened at Suzuka. And once you see the full picture, you'll understand why the paddock is genuinely worried. Start with the basics. The 2026 regulations split power equally between the combustion engine and the electric motor. Sounds revolutionary on paper, but in reality, it's created something nobody fully predicted. Cars that can lose 45 kilometers per hour of speed mid-straight at full throttle. Not from a mechanical failure, not from a crash, just from a battery hitting its limit. At Suzuka, Max Verstappen's Red Bull hit 318 kilometers per hour on the back straight, then started bleeding speed all the way to the chicane, flat out, foot to the floor, losing power anyway. That's not racing. That's a driver being a passenger. But here's where things start getting genuinely strange. While Verstappen was dealing with that, his teammate Isaac Hadjar was being coached through literally every lap by his race engineer. Formation lap, battery instructions. Lap 2, battery instructions. Lap 5, his engineer explaining the exact throttle technique needed just to optimize the boost. George Russell on lap 9, fighting for the lead, receiving constant battery management. T-calls. And then on lap 37, Russell loses power completely, and Leclerc drives straight past him like he's standing still. And this is where people started asking real questions. Because if your race engineer is basically flying the car for you, what exactly is the driver doing? At first, most people assumed this was just a teething problem. New regulations, new systems, teams will figure it out after a few races. That was the easy explanation. That's what the FIA essentially implied when they quietly reduced Suzuka's energy recovery limit from 9 to 8 megajoules before the race even started, admitting the track was too demanding for the current system, but framing it as a minor adjustment. But then Lewis Hamilton spoke, and he didn't complain about his car. He didn't blame his engineers. He said something far more uncomfortable, that he expects absolutely nothing from the FIA's regulation meetings. Not frustration, not anger, complete disbelief that the system is even capable of fixing itself. When the most experienced driver on the grid publicly says the governing body's meetings are pointless, that's not a complaint. That's a diagnosis. And suddenly the teething problem explanation completely falls apart. Here's the part that changes everything. Because while Hamilton was exposing the political problem, Ferrari and Mercedes were locked in a technical war that reveals just how broken the foundation actually is. Mercedes found something extraordinary. The 2026 rules contain an emergency shutoff mode, designed as a safety net for genuine power unit failures. A kill switch for emergencies. Mercedes and Red Bull figured out they could trigger it deliberately in qualifying, cutting from full 350 kilowatt output to 0 instantly, skipping the mandatory stepped power down process entirely. This kept maximum electric power all the way to the finish line. Then they took the 60-second battery lockout penalty on the cooldown lap, a lap that means nothing for the result. Ferrari was stepping power down exactly as the rules intended, losing speed in the final sector every single qualifying lap. Mercedes was holding full power to the line. And the consequences weren't just competitive, they were physical. Oliver Behrman hit a 50 km per hour speed differential going into Spoon Corner. A 50G crash. The drivers had been warning the FIA about exactly this scenario for weeks. And yet 3 races in, no ban, no order, just a meeting scheduled for April 9th in London. 3 races. 3 separate Mercedes power unit controversies. A compression ratio that stretches toward 18-1 under racing heat. A race start rule change that neutralized Ferrari's small turbo advantage. And now an emergency safety system turned into a qualifying weapon. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. So what does this actually mean for the rest of the season? 3 things are colliding simultaneously, and none of them are good for the sport. First, the drivers are suffering physically, not just competitively. Fernando Alonso took both hands off the wheel at racing speed in China just to restore feeling in his fingers. Aston Martin found a component at Suzuka that reduced his vibration problem by 80%, then secretly removed it. Right now, there are essentially three ways this develops from here. The first scenario, the April 9th meeting produces real changes. The emergency shutoff loophole gets closed. Energy limits get restructured. Ferrari's B-spec engine arrives in Miami with that 10 km/h straight-line gain. Hamilton gets back on the podium, and suddenly this championship has a genuine fight on its hands. The second scenario, the FIA acts too slowly or the changes are too minor. Mercedes absorbs whatever restrictions come, retains its advantage, and by mid-season the gap is simply too large for anyone to close. The championship becomes a procession. The anger in the paddock gets louder. The third scenario, and honestly the most dangerous one, nothing fundamental changes. Teams start exploiting every gray area in an unstable regulation. The crashes get worse. The driver frustration becomes public revolt. And Formula One spends the rest of 2026 managing a crisis that every person inside the paddock already saw building from lap 1 of the season opener. So now the real question isn't whether Ferrari can close the gap or whether Mercedes will lose their loopholes. The real question is whether the people running this sport actually understand what they've built, and whether they'll fix it before the drivers, the teams, and the fans lose faith entirely. Because if you made it this far, you already know Formula One is never just about speed. It's about politics, survival, and sometimes the kind of chaos nobody planned for. So tell me, is this still the pinnacle of motorsport? Or did we just watch it become something else entirely? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.